The helicopter blades chopped through the thick Afghan air as Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sarah Mitchell checked her medical kit for the third time. The Black Hawk carrying Alpha team descended toward the landing zone, a dusty clearing surrounded by jagged mountains that had witnessed countless battles over the centuries. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision over her supplies. Tourniquets, morphine, combat gauze, chest seals. Everything a Navy SEAL medic needed to keep warriors alive in the world's most unforgiving battlefields. At 26, Sarah had already served 3 deployments, but this mission felt different. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was holed up in a compound just 2 clicks from their insertion point. The target was believed to be planning an attack on a nearby forward operating base that housed over 200 American and Allied personnel. The stakes couldn't be higher. 2 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through her headset. Sarah glanced across the cabin at her teammates. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, the team leader, was studying satellite imagery on his tablet. Petty Officer Jake Sullivan cleaned his rifle with methodical care. Petty Officer First Class David Kim stared out the window, his jaw tight with concentration. These men had become her brothers over 18 months of training and deployment. She would die for any of them, and she knew they felt the same about her. Sarah had fought hard to earn her place among the SEALs. When she first volunteered for special operations training, many questioned whether a woman could handle the physical and mental demands. The grueling selection process had pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. She'd carried wounded teammates through swamps, performed emergency surgery in simulated combat conditions, and proven that gender meant nothing when lives hung in the balance. The compound came into view as they approached the landing zone. It was larger than expected, with multiple buildings arranged around a central courtyard. High walls surrounded the perimeter, and narrow windows suggested the occupants had prepared for a siege. Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission calm settle over her. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford once boots hit the ground. "Remember, we need this guy alive," Chief Rodriguez spoke into his microphone. "High Command wants to interrogate him about the planned attack. Sarah, you might need to provide medical attention to keep him breathing if things get rough." The helicopter touched down with a gentle thud. Sarah's team moved with fluid coordination, each member knowing their role without need for verbal communication. They had practiced this insertion hundreds of times. Sarah carried her medical pack plus a modified M4 rifle. As a medic, her primary job was keeping her teammates alive, but every SEAL was a warrior first. The compound was eerily quiet as they approached. Intelligence had suggested at least 8 hostile combatants inside, but no movement was visible from their position. Chief Rodriguez signaled for Sarah and Jake to circle around to the rear entrance while he and Kim approached from the front. The plan was to create confusion and prevent anyone from escaping. Sarah's heart pounded as she and Jake moved along the compound's back wall. Her medical training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but combat situations always triggered an adrenaline rush that took conscious effort to control. She thought about her family back in Ohio, her parents who still worried every day about their daughter's dangerous career, her younger brother who looked up to her with pride and concern. The rear entrance was a heavy wooden door reinforced with metal bands. Jake placed a small explosive charge while Sarah provided security. The controlled blast would create their entry point while hopefully not alerting the entire compound to their presence. As Jake worked, Sarah scanned the windows above them for any sign of movement. A muffled explosion from the front of the compound indicated that Chief Rodriguez and Kim had begun their assault. Jake's charge detonated a second later, splintering the rear door into manageable pieces. Sarah moved through the smoke-filled doorway first, her rifle raised and ready. The interior of the compound was a maze of narrow corridors and small rooms. Sarah could hear gunfire from the front of the building as her teammates engaged the enemy. She and Jake moved methodically through the rear section, clearing each room with practiced efficiency. Most of the rooms appeared to be storage areas filled with supplies and ammunition. In the third room they entered, Sarah discovered something that made her blood run cold. Along one wall, 5 young girls sat huddled together, their hands bound with rope, their eyes wide with terror. They appeared to be between 10 and 15 years old. Their clothes were torn and dirty, suggesting they had been held captive for some time. "Jake," Sarah whispered, "we have civilians, children." Jake's face hardened as he took in the scene. This wasn't part of their mission briefing. Intelligence had said nothing about hostages, particularly children. Sarah's medical instincts kicked in as she knelt beside the girls, speaking in the limited Pashto she had learned during her deployments. "We're here to help," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if they understood. One of the girls, perhaps 13 years old, had visible injuries on her arms. Sarah reached for her medical kit, but the sound of approaching footsteps made Jake grab her shoulder. 2 men appeared in the doorway, their rifles raised toward Sarah and Jake. The engagement was swift and violent. Jake's training took over as he eliminated both threats within seconds, but the gunfire had certainly alerted anyone else in the compound to their presence. "We need to get these girls out of here," Sarah said, already working to cut their bonds. The tactical situation had become exponentially more complex. Evacuating 5 traumatized children from an active combat zone was not something they had planned for. Jake spoke into his radio, informing Chief Rodriguez of their discovery. The response came back immediately. "Negative on civilian evacuation. Mission priority is the target. Continue the assault." Sarah stared at Jake in disbelief. As a medic, she had taken an oath to do no harm and to protect the innocent. These children were innocent victims of whatever operation the target was running from this compound. She couldn't simply leave them to whatever fate awaited them after the assault was complete. "Sarah, we have our orders," Jake said, though his voice carried no conviction. She could see in his eyes that he was as troubled by the situation as she was. The sound of gunfire was getting closer. Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. She began leading the children toward a window that faced away from the main combat area. If she could get them outside, they might have a chance to escape to safety. "Doc, what are you doing?" Jake asked, though he was already moving to help her. "What I have to do," Sarah replied. She had always believed that protecting innocent life was the highest calling of her profession. These children deserved a chance to live free from whatever horrors they had already endured. As they prepared to move the children through the window, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Sarah turned to see a large man in military fatigues approaching their position. The insignia on his uniform indicated he was a general, though not American. His face was flushed with rage, and he carried a sidearm in his right hand. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared in heavily accented English. Sarah realized this must be the high-value target they had come to capture. But why was he wearing what appeared to be Pakistani military insignia? Sarah positioned herself between the general and the children. Her rifle was ready, but something about the situation felt wrong. Why was their target dressed as a Pakistani general? Intelligence had described him as a terrorist leader, not a military officer from an allied nation. "You will leave those girls where they are," the general commanded, his weapon pointed at Sarah's chest. "They are not your concern." Sarah felt Jake tense beside her. The tactical situation was rapidly deteriorating. They were outnumbered, had discovered a complex hostage situation, and were now facing what appeared to be a foreign military officer rather than the terrorist they expected to find. The general's eyes were cold and calculating. Sarah had seen enough combat to recognize a man who would kill without hesitation, but she had also seen enough innocent victims to know she couldn't abandon these children to whatever fate he had planned for them. "I'm a medic," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "These children need medical attention. I'm not leaving them here." The general's laugh was harsh and bitter. You naive Americans, always thinking you can save everyone. These girls serve a purpose here. They are not going anywhere. Sarah's stomach turned as she realized the full implications of what he was saying. These children weren't just hostages. They were being held for something far worse. Her medical training had shown her the aftermath of human trafficking and exploitation. She wouldn't let that continue. "Jake, call for immediate extraction," she said without taking her eyes off the general. "Tell them we need medical evacuation for multiple civilian casualties." "Negative," came Chief Rodriguez's voice through their earpieces. "Mission is capture of the target. Do not compromise the operation." The general smiled coldly. "Your leaders understand the complexities of this situation better than you do, little medic. There are larger political considerations at play here. These girls are a small price to pay for regional stability." Sarah felt her world shifting beneath her feet. Everything about this mission had been wrong from the beginning. They weren't fighting terrorists. They were caught in the middle of something much more complex and morally ambiguous. But her duty as a medic remained clear: protect innocent life. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah could hear the gunfire from other parts of the compound diminishing. Either her teammates were winning or they were being overwhelmed. Either way, she needed to act soon. The general seemed to read her thoughts. "Your team is outnumbered, medic. Surrender now, and perhaps we can reach an arrangement that keeps everyone alive." Sarah knew he was lying. Men who trafficked children didn't make honorable arrangements. She also knew that Jake was waiting for her signal. Whatever decision she made in the next few seconds would determine the fate of 5 innocent children and possibly change her life forever. As the general's finger tightened on his trigger, Sarah made the choice that would indeed change military law forever. She dropped to one knee and opened fire. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. When the smoke cleared, the general lay motionless on the floor. Sarah immediately turned her attention to the children, checking each one for injuries while Jake secured the area. "This is going to cause problems," Jake said quietly as he examined the general's body. "Big problems." Sarah didn't respond. She was already focused on getting the children to safety. Whatever consequences awaited her, she could live with them. What she couldn't live with was abandoning innocent children to a monster who saw them as expendable. Chief Rodriguez's voice came through their earpieces again, this time with an edge of panic. "All teams, converge on the rear section immediately. We have a situation." As Sarah led the children toward the window, she wondered what kind of situation could be worse than what they had already discovered. She was about to find out that her decision to protect those children had implications that reached far beyond this remote compound in Afghanistan. The extraction helicopter was already approaching as Sarah and Jake emerged from the compound with the 5 children. Chief Rodriguez and Kim were waiting for them, their faces grim. Behind them, several figures in American uniforms were restraining other members of what appeared to be a joint task force. "Sarah," Chief Rodriguez said, his voice heavy with something she couldn't identify. "We need to talk." As the helicopter landed and the children were helped aboard by the crew chief, Sarah realized her war was just beginning. The general she had killed wasn't just any enemy combatant. He was a Pakistani intelligence officer working with the CIA on a classified operation. The children she had saved were part of a complex intelligence-gathering operation that she had just single-handedly destroyed. Standing in the rotor wash of the helicopter, Sarah faced a terrible truth. Sometimes doing the right thing had consequences that no one could foresee. As they lifted off from the compound, she wondered if her oath as a medic would be enough to protect her from what was coming next. The interrogation room at Bagram Airfield was sterile and cold, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look pale and lifeless. Sarah had been sitting at the metal table for 6 hours, answering the same questions over and over again from a rotating cast of officers, investigators, and intelligence personnel. Her hands were steady as she reached for the plastic water bottle, but inside, her mind was reeling from everything she had learned in the past 72 hours. The children she had rescued were safe. That much she knew. They had been turned over to humanitarian organizations and were receiving proper medical care. But everything else about that mission had been built on lies and half-truths that went deeper than she ever imagined possible. Colonel James Harrison, the lead investigator from the Judge Advocate General's office, entered the room carrying a thick folder of documents. He was a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of precise movements that suggested a career built on attention to detail. Sarah had been dealing with him since her return from the compound, and she could tell he was both frustrated and sympathetic to her situation. "Corpsman Mitchell," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I want to go over the events one more time, but first, I need you to understand something. The man you killed, General Rashid Malik, was indeed a Pakistani intelligence officer. But he wasn't just working with the CIA. He was running a joint counterterrorism operation that had been in place for over 2 years. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed made everything worse. "The children, sir, were they part of the operation?" Colonel Harrison's expression was pained. "That's where things get complicated. General Malik claimed they were informants, children who had been orphaned by Taliban attacks and were providing intelligence about insurgent activities in exchange for protection and food. But our investigation suggests something far more sinister was happening." He opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. Sarah recognized the compound where the mission had taken place, but these images showed it from different angles and at different times. These surveillance photos were taken over the past 6 months. We can clearly see these girls being brought to the compound, but we can also see other children who have since disappeared. Sarah studied the photographs, her medical training helping her notice details that others might miss. These girls show signs of malnutrition and physical abuse. Look at their posture, the way they're holding themselves. That's not consistent with children who are being protected. "Exactly what our medical team concluded," Colonel Harrison agreed. "Which brings us to the central question of this investigation. Did you act appropriately given the information you had available at the time?" Before Sarah could answer, the door opened and another officer entered. This was General Patricia Hawkins, a stern woman in her late 50s who commanded respect from everyone in the room. Sarah had heard of General Hawkins. She was known for her brilliant legal mind and her unwavering commitment to military justice. She was also the highest-ranking female officer Sarah had ever encountered. "Corpsman Mitchell," General Hawkins said, her voice carrying authority that filled the room. "I've been reviewing your case, and I need to ask you something directly. When you made the decision to engage General Malik, what was your primary concern?" Sarah straightened in her chair. "The safety of those children, ma'am. As a medic, I'm sworn to protect innocent life. Those girls were clearly being held against their will, and they showed signs of abuse and neglect." General Hawkins nodded slowly. "And you understood that by engaging the target, you were potentially compromising a classified intelligence operation?" "I understood that there were larger political considerations, ma'am. But I also understood that children were being harmed, and I couldn't stand by and allow that to continue." The general exchanged a look with Colonel Harrison. "Corpsman Mitchell, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. General Malik's operation was indeed gathering valuable intelligence about insurgent activities. But our investigation has revealed that he was also trafficking children to high-ranking Taliban leaders as part of a broader intelligence penetration strategy." Sarah felt her blood run cold. The implications were staggering. "You mean our government was aware of child trafficking and allowing it to continue?" Not our government, General Hawkins clarified. But certain elements within the intelligence community were willing to overlook Malik's methods in exchange for the information he provided. When you killed him, you didn't just eliminate an intelligence asset, you exposed an operation that should never have been authorized. The room fell silent as Sarah processed this information. She had always believed in the chain of command and the importance of following orders. But this situation challenged everything she thought she knew about military service and moral responsibility. Colonel Harrison leaned forward. "Sarah, you need to understand the position this puts us in. Officially, you killed an Allied intelligence officer during a joint operation. That's a serious offense that could result in court-martial and imprisonment. But unofficially, you may have prevented the continued abuse of dozens of children." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. General Hawkins stood and walked to the small window that looked out over the airfield. "That depends on several factors that are still being determined at the highest levels of government. The Pakistani government is demanding your extradition to face murder charges. The CIA wants this entire incident buried to protect other ongoing operations. And Congress is starting to ask questions about oversight of intelligence activities." Sarah realized that her personal fate was tied up in much larger political considerations. Her simple act of protecting children had exposed a web of corruption and moral compromise that reached into the highest levels of the intelligence community. "There's something else you need to know," Colonel Harrison said, pulling out another document. 3 other girls were found dead at a second compound that was raided yesterday. They showed signs of prolonged abuse and had been killed recently, probably as soon as word of General Malik's death reached his associates. The weight of that information hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her actions had saved 5 children, but had indirectly led to the death of 3 others. The moral calculus of her decision was becoming impossibly complex. General Hawkins returned to the table. "Sarah, I want you to understand something. What you did in that compound was exactly what a good medic and a good soldier should do when faced with innocent children in danger. The fact that it complicated an intelligence operation is not your fault. It's the fault of whoever authorized that operation to continue despite clear evidence of child abuse. But those 3 girls who died would probably have died anyway," the general interrupted. "Our investigation suggests that children in Malik's network rarely survived more than 6 months. You didn't cause their deaths. You exposed a system that was killing children while our government looked the other way." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes for the first time since the mission. The emotional weight of everything, the mission, the investigation, the political implications, was finally hitting her. She had joined the military to serve her country and protect innocent people. Now she was caught in a situation where doing the right thing had made her an enemy of the state. "What are my options?" she asked. General Hawkins sat back down. "Legally, you have few options. The evidence is clear that you killed General Malik, and that action was not explicitly authorized by your mission parameters. But there are other considerations at play here." She pulled out a different folder. "The children you rescued have been interviewed by child psychologists and medical personnel. Their testimony paints a clear picture of systematic abuse that goes far beyond anything that could be justified by intelligence gathering. One of the girls, Amira, specifically told investigators that General Malik had told them they would be given as gifts to men who helped him. Sarah's medical training helped her understand the full implications of what Amira had described. These weren't informants or protected witnesses. They were victims of trafficking being used as rewards for cooperation in an intelligence network. "The medical examinations support Amira's testimony," Colonel Harrison added. "All 5 girls showed signs of physical and sexual abuse. Your intervention almost certainly saved their lives." General Hawkins leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen, Sarah. Officially, you're going to be charged with unauthorized engagement of a friendly asset. The charges are serious enough to justify significant punishment. But I'm going to personally ensure that the full circumstances of this case are presented to the court-martial board. You think that will make a difference? I think it has to make a difference, the general replied. Because if we don't stand up for soldiers who protect innocent children, then we've lost something fundamental about what it means to serve. Over the following days, Sarah learned more about the political firestorm her actions had created. Congressional investigators were demanding access to classified information about intelligence oversight. Human rights organizations were calling for full disclosure of what they suspected was a pattern of looking the other way while assets committed atrocities. The Pakistani government was threatening to end intelligence cooperation if Sarah wasn't punished severely. But Sarah also learned about support she hadn't expected. Her SEAL teammates had all provided statements supporting her actions. Chief Rodriguez had testified that Sarah's decision was consistent with their training to protect innocent civilians. Even some intelligence officers were quietly supporting her, arguing that operations like General Malik's actually made America less safe by undermining moral authority. The night before her court-martial was scheduled to begin, Sarah sat in her temporary quarters reviewing everything that had happened since that fateful mission. She had no regrets about saving those children, but she was terrified about what the future held. A conviction could mean decades in prison and the end of her military career. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Colonel Harrison stood in the hallway, his expression serious but not unsympathetic. "Sarah, there's been a development. I need you to come with me to meet with General Hawkins immediately." As they walked across the base in the Afghan darkness, Sarah wondered what new revelation could possibly change her situation. She was about to discover that the most powerful person in her case wasn't a general or a judge. It was one of the children she had saved. The meeting room was small and secure, with no windows and multiple locks on the door. General Hawkins was there, along with several other officers Sarah didn't recognize. But what shocked her was seeing Amira, the 13-year-old girl who had spoken to investigators, sitting at the table with a translator and what appeared to be a victim's advocate. "Amira asked to speak with you," General Hawkins explained. "She has something she wants to say before your trial begins." Amira looked directly at Sarah, her dark eyes holding a strength and maturity that no child should have to possess. Through the translator, she spoke slowly and clearly. "She says," the translator began, "that she wants to tell everyone what really happened in that place. She says the general told all the girls that they belong to him now and that he would decide who they were given to and when. She says you are the first person who ever protected them from him." Amira continued speaking, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She says that in her village they have a word for people who protect children from monsters. The word means guardian of innocence. She says you are her guardian of innocence, and she will tell that to anyone who will listen." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to Amira's words. This brave young girl was willing to testify about the horrors she had endured to protect the woman who had saved her life. "There's more," General Hawkins said. "Amira and the other girls have agreed to testify at your court-martial. Their testimony will be devastating to anyone trying to justify General Malik's operation." As Sarah looked at Amira's determined face, she realized that this case was about more than her own fate. It was about establishing that some lines could never be crossed no matter what intelligence value might be gained. It was about ensuring that protecting innocent children was always the right choice, regardless of political consequences. The court-martial that would begin tomorrow wouldn't just determine Sarah's future. It would determine what kind of military and what kind of country America wanted to be. And sitting across from her was a 13-year-old girl who was prepared to face her abuser's allies in court to make sure the right choice was made. The military courtroom at Fort Bragg was packed beyond capacity, with overflow seating arranged for the unprecedented number of observers who had come to witness what many were calling the most important court-martial in decades. Sarah sat at the defendant's table in her dress uniform, her ribbons and decorations a reminder of her 5 years of exemplary service. Beside her, Major Rebecca Torres, her defense attorney, reviewed notes one final time before the proceedings began. The prosecution team was led by Brigadier General Marcus Stone, a career judge advocate with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and an unwavering belief in the importance of maintaining military discipline. General Stone had made it clear from his opening statements that he viewed Sarah's actions as a dangerous precedent that undermined the authority structure essential to military operations. The trial had been going on for 3 days, with witness after witness called to testify about the complexity of intelligence operations and the importance of following orders in combat situations. CIA representatives had testified behind closed doors about the value of the intelligence General Malik had provided. Pakistani officials had demanded justice through diplomatic channels. The pressure to convict Sarah was enormous. But today was different. Today, Amira would testify. Judge Colonel Elizabeth Martinez called the court to order, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation that filled the room. Judge Martinez was known for her fairness and her deep understanding of both military law and international humanitarian standards. Sarah's fate rested in her hands. "The defense may call their next witness," Judge Martinez announced. Major Torres stood. "The defense calls Amira Haddad." A ripple of tension moved through the courtroom as the 13-year-old girl entered, accompanied by her translator and victim's advocate. She wore a simple blue dress and walked with the careful dignity of someone much older than her years. As she passed Sarah's table, she gave the smallest of nods, a gesture of recognition and solidarity. General Stone immediately stood. "Your Honor, I object to this witness. The testimony of a traumatized child cannot be considered reliable, and her presence here violates multiple protocols regarding the protection of minors in legal proceedings." Judge Martinez looked at him carefully. "General Stone, this child is a key witness to events that are central to this case. I will not exclude her testimony based on her age, but I will ensure that appropriate protections are in place. Please proceed, Major Torres." As Amira was sworn in with the help of her translator, Sarah could see the courage it was taking for her to be there. Testifying against the allies of her former captor in a room full of strangers required a bravery that most adults would struggle to muster. "Amira," Major Torres began gently, "can you tell the court how you came to be at the compound where you met Corman Mitchell?" Through the translator, Amira's story unfolded with heartbreaking clarity. She had been orphaned when Taliban fighters killed her parents for cooperating with American forces. She and her younger sister had been living on the streets of Kabul when men working for General Malik approached them, promising food and safety in exchange for helping with intelligence work. "What kind of intelligence work?" Major Torres asked. Amira's answer sent a chill through the courtroom. The intelligence work had consisted of being trained to seduce Taliban commanders and gather information through intimate relationships. The children who proved useful were kept alive. Those who didn't were disposed of. General Stone objected repeatedly, claiming the testimony was inflammatory and irrelevant to the charges against Sarah. But Judge Martinez allowed Amira to continue, recognizing that understanding the full context of the situation was essential to determining whether Sarah's actions were justified. "Tell the court about the day Corman Mitchell found you," Major Torres continued. Amira's voice grew stronger as she described the fear and desperation she had felt when the compound came under attack. She had thought they were all going to die. Then Sarah had appeared, cutting their bonds and leading them to safety, despite the danger to herself. "General Malik said we belonged to him," Amira testified. "He said American soldiers would never risk their mission for girls like us, but Corman Mitchell proved him wrong." General Stone's cross-examination was aggressive and technical, focusing on inconsistencies in Amira's account and questioning her ability to accurately remember events during a traumatic situation. But Amira remained composed, answering each question with a clarity that impressed everyone in the courtroom. "Isn't it true," General Stone demanded, "that you have no way of knowing whether General Malik's intelligence work saved American lives?" Amira looked at him for a long moment before responding. "I know that he hurt children. I know that Corman Mitchell saved us. That is what I know." The courtroom was silent as Amira stepped down. Her testimony had fundamentally changed the atmosphere of the trial. This was no longer just about military procedure and following orders. It was about the moral foundation of everything the military claimed to stand for. Over the next day, the defense called a parade of expert witnesses. Child psychologists testified about the long-term trauma caused by trafficking. International law experts explained that protecting civilian populations, especially children, was a fundamental obligation that transcended operational considerations. Medical personnel confirmed the physical evidence of abuse found during the children's examinations. But the most powerful testimony came from Sarah's own teammates. Chief Rodriguez took the stand and described Sarah's character and dedication throughout their deployments. He testified that her decision to protect the children was entirely consistent with her training and her oath as a medic. "Corman Mitchell saved my life in Helmand Province," Chief Rodriguez testified. "She carried me 3 miles to an evacuation site after I was wounded by an IED. She's never backed down from doing what's right, even when it's dangerous." Jake Sullivan's testimony was equally compelling. He described the tactical situation at the compound and confirmed that Sarah had given him multiple opportunities to follow their original orders. Her decision to protect the children had been made only after it became clear that they were in immediate danger. But it was Sarah's own testimony that proved to be the turning point in the trial. Taking the stand on the 4th day, Sarah spoke clearly and directly about her actions. She admitted that she had known her decision might compromise the mission. She acknowledged that intelligence operations often require difficult moral compromises. But she maintained that protecting innocent children from immediate harm was a higher duty than following orders. "I became a medic to save lives," Sarah testified. "I took an oath to do no harm and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. When I saw those children in that room, I knew they were in immediate danger. I could not walk away and still call myself a healer." General Stone's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked Sarah's decision-making, her understanding of the larger strategic picture, and her right to unilaterally change mission parameters. His questions were designed to portray her as a rogue operator who had prioritized her personal feelings over military discipline. "Corman Mitchell," General Stone said, his voice rising with frustration, "do you understand that your actions resulted in the death of other children? Do you understand that you destroyed an intelligence network that had taken years to develop? Do you understand that your personal feelings about children do not give you the right to ignore direct orders from superior officers?" Sarah remained calm as she answered each accusation. Yes, she understood that other children had died. Yes, she understood the intelligence implications. But no, she did not believe that following orders to abandon innocent children was consistent with her duty as a soldier or as a human being. The confrontation reached its climax when General Stone, clearly frustrated by Sarah's calm responses, suddenly stood and pointed directly at her. "Corman Mitchell, your defiance of lawful orders makes you unfit for military service. Your emotional decision-making makes you a danger to every soldier who might serve with you in the future. You should have followed your orders and completed your mission. Instead, you chose to play God with the lives of children and soldiers alike." His voice rose to almost a shout. The military cannot function if every soldier decides for themselves which orders to follow. You have betrayed your oath, betrayed your teammates, and betrayed your country. You deserve to be stripped of your rank and spend the rest of your life in prison." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs, but General Stone wasn't finished. Standing now, his face red with anger, he pointed directly at Sarah and delivered the words that would be quoted in military law textbooks for decades to come. "Die now to military law, Corpsman Mitchell," he roared, "because what you did was murder." But Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she stood calmly and looked directly at General Stone. "Sir, with respect, what I did was save 5 children from monsters. If that's murder in the eyes of military law, then military law needs to change." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah had articulated something that everyone in the courtroom had been thinking, but no one had been willing to say. The current system of military justice was inadequate to address situations where following orders meant enabling atrocities against innocent civilians. Judge Martinez called for a recess, but the damage to the prosecution's case was irreparable. General Stone's emotional outburst had revealed the fundamental weakness in his argument, that military discipline was more important than protecting innocent life. When court reconvened for closing arguments, Major Torres delivered a passionate defense that focused on Sarah's character, her training, and the moral clarity of her decision. She argued that Sarah had done exactly what any good soldier should do when faced with clear evidence of child abuse. "The question before this court is not whether Corpsman Mitchell followed her orders," Major Torres said. "The question is whether we want a military that produces soldiers who will protect innocent children, or a military that produces soldiers who will ignore their suffering for the sake of operational convenience." General Stone's closing argument was technically proficient, but lacked the moral authority he needed to convince the court. His earlier outburst had revealed him to be more concerned with institutional protection than with justice. Judge Martinez retired to consider her verdict, and the entire military legal community held its breath. The case had attracted international attention, with human rights organizations and military experts around the world weighing in on the fundamental questions it raised. When court reconvened the next morning, Judge Martinez delivered a verdict that would indeed change military law forever. In the case of the United States versus Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sarah Mitchell, this court finds the defendant not guilty of all charges. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause, but Judge Martinez wasn't finished. This case has revealed serious deficiencies in current military law regarding the protection of civilian populations, particularly children, during intelligence operations. This court recommends that the Judge Advocate General's office immediately begin drafting new regulations that clearly establish the duty of all military personnel to protect innocent civilians from abuse, regardless of the operational context. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the full impact of the verdict hit her. She had not only been cleared of wrongdoing, her case had become the catalyst for fundamental changes in how the military approached civilian protection. In the months that followed, Sarah's case did indeed lead to sweeping changes in military law. The Mitchell Doctrine, as it came to be known, established clear legal protections for service members who intervened to stop abuse of civilians during military operations. Intelligence oversight was strengthened, with new requirements for regular review of asset behavior and immediate intervention when evidence of atrocities emerged. Sarah returned to active duty and eventually became a leading advocate for military medical ethics. She testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections for civilian populations in conflict zones. She trained new generations of medics and special operations personnel about their duty to protect innocent life. The 5 children she saved all survived and thrived. Amira eventually came to the United States as a refugee and became a powerful advocate for child protection. She often spoke about the American soldier who had risked everything to save her and her friends. General Stone was quietly reassigned to a desk job and eventually retired early. The intelligence operation that Sarah had disrupted was thoroughly investigated, leading to criminal charges against several CIA officers and a complete overhaul of oversight procedures. Years later, Sarah would often think about that moment in the Afghan compound when she had to choose between following orders and protecting innocent children. She never regretted her decision. The 5 girls she saved had grown into strong young women who were building new lives free from the horrors they had endured. But perhaps the most important legacy of her case was the change it brought to military law itself. Future generations of soldiers would serve under regulations that clearly established their duty to protect innocent civilians, even when doing so complicated military operations. Sarah's moment of moral clarity in that compound had become the foundation for a more ethical approach to modern warfare. The title that newspapers around the world had used to describe her case proved prophetic. Her actions had indeed changed military law forever, and in doing so, she had helped ensure that future soldiers would never face the terrible choice between following orders and protecting innocent children. For Sarah Mitchell, that was a legacy worth fighting for.